discussion in the plenary. We will have many discussions in the group in the afternoon. And this second one will concentrate on a specific topic which is more related to regional developments and national developments with the so-called BRICS countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. You are aware of this bloc called BRICS, which includes these 5 emerging economies and nations. And we are happy to have representatives of these 5 nations and Pan-African representatives, so to say, also, here in the round. We have, if I start there, we have Mr. Ravi, Senior Fellow at the Center for Public Policy, here at the IIMB, but he has a very long record in politics as Vice Minister of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, serving in various countries in embassies, serving in trade negotiations and many functions with ASEAN countries and others. So somebody who knows really economy not from theory but from practice during decades. We have Alexander Ageev. He's a professor of economics and founding director of the Institute for Economic Strategies in Moscow. This is a think tank created in 1990, which tries to promote innovation and strategic thinking with the government, but with the private sector and other actors like also religious organizations, in order to promote this thinking and at the same time as an independent think tank. Then we have Professor Baocheng from Beijing. He is professor of economics also, so we have a lot of economists, but economists who are interested in, not only interested, but very knowledgeable about ethics. He is also director of the Center for Business Ethics, International Business Ethics in Beijing, and he's also director of GlobalEthicsNet China, the regional program, as Alexander Ageev is the director of GlobalEthicsNet Russia. So you see we have very interesting partners in these different countries. And then we have another professor, Professor Deon Rossouw from South Africa. He is CEO of the Ethics Institute South Africa, which is dealing with a lot of trainings and standard settings in business ethics with the corporate sector, with the public sector in South Africa, but also in many other African countries, Southern Africa, Eastern, and Francophone Africa even. And he's director of GlobalEthicsNet South Africa. So you see another person who is linked to GlobalEthicsNet. That is more by chance, to be honest, that they also represent these regions. And then we have Aurélien Atidegla from Benin, Cotonou, Benin, who is on one hand a practitioner as an agronomist and somebody who knows the terrain, the field, especially also of the rural areas, but who is also have a decade-long experience as organizer of the NGO sector, as president of OSCAF, which is an NGO or umbrella of NGOs in 20 Francophone African countries, and dealing with these different aspects, governments, academia, and NGOs, I think shows the diversity that multi-stakeholder approach that we want to have in our discussion in the whole forum. The topic is not anymore very general, which was very important the last panel and introductory keynote, but focuses now on these different geographical entities. What are the developments of inequality and equality in the respective emerging countries and economies? Why is it developing so, and what are the solutions? This is the main focus of today and of this panel. And I would like to mention only a few figures. One is, we are aware of the economic importance of the BRICS countries. A report of the UN of March 2013 says that by the year 2020, so only 6 years from now, the BRICS countries will surpass the aggregate GDP of US and EU together. So this shows the economic weight which we are all are aware. We also know that in environmental terms, of course, these BRICS countries also belong to the club of the most polluting countries in the world nowadays. So it's no more just the North, it's the BRICS countries are part of that. 80% of the energy consumption is in the G20 countries, where a big part is, of course, the BRICS. I also would like to quote a famous economist, Paul Krugman. Just 2 days ago in the airplane I read in the New York Times, he said, we are finally starting to talk about real issues like inequality, not a fake fiscal crisis or such issues, and that has to be good. So he says, to talk about inequality is the topic of the time, and he published it on the 1st of January 2014. And another vote is, or document I would like to refer is the BRICS Summit, which is held, I think, every year. The last one in March 2013 in Durban published a document, BRICS and Africa Partnership for Development, Integration and Industrialization. So the question, how are the BRICS countries linked to Africa with a positive effect, with a negative effect? This is on the table of the political agenda and should be on the table of our panel. With this introductory remark, I would like to start, maybe not in the same order as it is here, but start with Deon. He has an interesting survey to present, very briefly to summarize the results, a survey on perception of Chinese activities in Africa. And by the way, this panel will have a succession this afternoon in work group 2, moderated by Ambassador Walter Fuss, President of Progressive Net, who will then be able to deepen this discussion of this morning. Deon.
No. That doesn't seem so. There we go. Good morning, and thank you for the introduction, Christoph. Africa, as you well know, has for very long been known as the dark continent. And when it comes to inequalities, and we can look at different inequalities, inequalities in terms of education, prosperity, health, literacy, mortality, then it was indeed a dark continent. But we also know that there's a link between this inequality and the history of colonization. In other words, the presence of other countries on the African continent. But nowadays we hear a totally different tone. We hear about Africa rising. We hear that 6 of the 10 top fastest growing economies over the next decade will be on the African continent. But that does not mean that there will be fundamental changes to inequality, because it does not necessarily translate into a redistribution of wealth. And we just need to be reminded that still 50% of Africans live under $1 per day. So those are the stark realities. But with this new scenario of Africa rising, there's also a renewed interest in Africa, in its natural resources, but also in a large potential market that is still untapped. And what interests me, and that will be the topic of my short presentation, is the interest of specifically China in Africa. Because it is a fact that China has become Africa's largest trade partner and also the fourth biggest investor in Africa. So China, along with all the other interests in the African continent, is playing a very dominant role. And the question now is, how should we look at the Chinese presence in Africa, specifically from this perspective of getting to a better situation around equality? Is it adding to that? Is it part of the solution, or is it deepening the problem around inequality? Now, if you would only take the Western and also the African media as your source, you will very soon come to the conclusion that this is a very negative picture unfolding, because there's a lot of negative publicity around the presence of African investors and African companies and also small traders on the African continent. And the concerns revolve around a number of issues. The first one is the Chinese policy of non-interference, that investments comes with no strings attached, and that often leads to a condonement of undemocratic practices, autocratic leaders, and abuse of human rights. In other words, some people see this alternative source of investment and of development funding that is available to Africa as a threat to democracy and human rights. Then, of course, we often read about unfair labor practices in terms of safety, health, wages. We read a lot about corruption, deals that aren't transparent, where politicians benefit in an undue manner. We read about ecological damage, about losses of jobs. Just in South Africa, in the textile industry, 800 firms, textile firms closed, and 60,000 jobs in that specific industry were lost. And more, we also read about very real conflicts between local communities and Chinese communities settling there around specifically construction and mining projects. And on top of that, a new term has been coined called Fong Kong, which refers to poor quality products that are finding their way into Africa from China. So, as I say, if you take the Western media as your only source, this is likely the story that you will hear. But there's another side to the story. There's also a positive side to the story. If you travel across Africa, and I'm fortunate to do a lot of that, you can see how the Chinese presence has really changed the face of Africa in terms of infrastructure, airports, roads, universities, hospitals, government buildings. That clearly is something that is a positive contribution, as we can also see contributions regarding education, scholarship schemes, centers being established, hospitals, agriculture, and also new connections in Africa between different countries, where countries that were formerly isolated from one another are now connected. And that, of course, is conducive for trade. Then, the other thing, on the one hand, there's complaints about cheap, low-quality goods entering Africa, but the reality also is that it has put affordable goods, clothing, but also other consumer goods into the hands of Africans. So that is another positive contribution. It has also strengthened South collaboration, leads to local economic development, and I think very importantly, provided an alternative model of economic development to Africa compared to the one that they were used to. Now, against this backdrop, we decided to move beyond what we read in newspapers and to launch a survey in which we look at what are the perceptions of Africans around the presence of Chinese businesses in Africa? It's a survey that we conducted online. We conducted it in the 15 countries where the Chinese has the biggest presence in Africa. And we also did it, if I say we, it's the Ethics Institute of South Africa who conducted the survey, but we did it in very close collaboration with globeethics.net because we used their regional structures in Eastern and Francophone Africa to get people to participate. Now, as it goes with online surveys in Africa, the response rate was not at all satisfactory. But we got decent samples from South Africa, from Nigeria, and from Kenya, which is fortunate because it gives one a glimpse on West Africa, Nigeria, South Africa in Southern Africa, and Kenya in East Africa. And what was quite striking is that there are huge regional differences. The presence of Chinese businesses in Africa is deemed much more negative in South Africa and Nigeria when you compare that with Kenya, where the impressions are much more favorable, and that is something interesting to decipher. Now, let me show you very briefly, only 2 slides, Christoph, what the main findings were. If we look, we provided people with a list of positive statements in those 6 areas. The reputation of Chinese companies in Africa, their economic impact, the quality of Chinese products and services, their social responsibility, employment practices, and also their environmental responsibility. And then on a scale, they could express either their agreement or disagreement on these 6 issues. And if you look there, in the blue column, those areas in which the respondents were most positive was first of all reputation, where 35% of respondents agreed that Chinese companies has a good reputation in Africa. 28% agreed that they have a positive economic impact. In terms of Chinese products and services, you can see the figures are now dropping to 22% who had a positive impression of the quality of Chinese products and services. 21% agreed that they are socially responsible. A bit less that their employment practices are fair. And you can see by far the lowest score, only about 1 in 10 people agreed that they are environmentally responsible. When it comes to the negative perceptions, in other words, when people disagreed on the statements that they were given, you can see the strongest disagreement, where people felt the strongest, was exactly around the quality of Chinese products and services, where almost 56% expressed a negative opinion about that. Followed shortly by environmental responsibility at about 54%, and then 46% who disagreed that employment practices are fair, about the same figure that they are socially responsible, 43% that Chinese companies have a positive reputation, and 40% disagreed that they have a positive economic impact. So on a very high level, this gives one a sense of the perceptions. We will publish a full report because in each of these categories there are a number of items, and then one can unpack it, but I don't think we have time for that now. So let me just conclude by saying that Chinese presence in Africa, of course, is a reality, and a reality that will continue. And the challenge is that we need to convert that into a positive win-win situation, and a situation that can address the inequalities that so importantly need to be addressed. If we look at solutions, I think on the one hand...
Maybe we can come to that afterwards.
Okay, let me stop right there. Then we can talk about what are possible solutions. Thank you, Christoph.
Thank you very much, Deon. an example of this cooperation between academics and practitioners to make analysis in order to get a clearer picture what is prejudices and what is perception and what is reality. Liu, you are very much involved in this question of international economic development of China, but also the inner economic development within China. And maybe most of the Chinese are more interested in equality and inequality within China than internationally. Your insights?
Well, I think we have to first view the quality or the inequality issue with regard to the performance of the BRIC countries on a global spectrum. So it is now the result of a renewed global division of labor that result in many of those complex issues, finger-pointing to those BRIC countries. So the relocation of manufacturing capacity from Europe, from North America to those BRIC countries caused a new spectrum of global production and global consumption. So now as a result, the BRICS countries, they are now the factories of the world, and whereas the developed countries, they are not making things, but rather they are making rules and stories. So in which one specific example I researched into a small town in Guangdong province. They are the biggest footwear manufacturer base for the whole world. The Nike shoes they make is sold to Nike company at $12 per pair. And so in this way, if we line up the Nike shoes we make around the equator, that is not there in exchange to justify one Boeing airplane. So this really division of labor, makes the situation of inequity more complex. That's one thing. And also because of this division of labor, so the BRICS countries presents itself more as a dynamic blue worker of the world. And what is the typical feature of a blue worker? They eat a lot, which means consume a lot of energy and the resources. They fruct a lot, meaning a lot of more pollution. And they make a lot more commodities that are not really enjoying good quality. So as for the quality issue, made in China is flooding the world. I also made a number of inquiries to those big exporters to the point that Deon mentioned about the local consumers' complaint against made in China. Actually, the Chinese response is that, okay, we have different quality standards. The Africans, they ask for the low quality standard because they want to pay less. We have higher quality. We sell BYD to them at $5,000, but if they buy Mercedes, they buy, China also makes Mercedes and Volvo, but they do not want to spend 10 times more of the money to buy the high quality cars. So that's also really brings a dilemma over the quality issue. Now within China, okay, actually we are going through modernization for so many years. But what is the typical modernization? Modernization entails urbanization, industrialization, motorization, and commoditization. So all of this presents a new challenge towards equity issue within China, because with urbanization, those migrant workers, they may lose homes. And this is particularly serious when the social welfare belt is very thinly spread over this bunch of people, okay? And demographic issue. because of the China one-child policy implementation for so many years, and right now the one child has to support at least 4 parents. And when these people move into the cities, how do they really survive in the current structure without a very well constructed social infrastructure to support those families living on a traditional Chinese value? So lastly, I think is the government issue, because China has been very successful by implementing a more authoritarian government to introduce its reform and initiate a number of big infrastructure projects. However, now the limitation is also there because, without a growing civil society and this type of growth, this type of quality of life can hardly sustain. Okay, I stop here.
Thank you very much, Liu. We switch to India. India and China are often described as competitors in a positive way. Inequality and equality in India, what is your perception and also the need to overcome inequality?
Thank you very much, Christoph. As far as India is concerned, our journey is not begun in 1991 when our economic reform process started. Our journey has been going on for more than 2 millennia, in fact more. I put it this way, there are 2 facets to inequality in India. One is the fact as to what background do you come from, whether it's caste or race or ethnicity, as defined by geography. And the second facet would be, shall we say, the effect of all the development that has taken place thus far, reflected in incomes, wealth, and other assets that have been garnered by the people who have been part of the economic process. There, of course, I do concede the distribution of wealth created, particularly in the last few decades, last 2-3 decades, because India hasn't had a single year of negative GDP growth since 1980, if I'm not mistaken. And all this wealth, the government is always trying to make sure that through various schemes, such wealth is distributed or more people get chances to be part of that economic growth process. Sometimes it succeeds, sometimes the success is sort of, a little mixed. One of the programs started by the government of providing guaranteed rural employment in India did have success in the initial months and even years, couple of years, but later on it degenerated into something that I'd rather not go deep into, but except to say that the effectiveness of that was lost, and the original aim of the government to make sure that people do not unnecessarily migrate into cities, that particular objective has not yet been met. In fact, in some cases, the migration continues even to this day because there are no jobs really available in the rural areas. That's one of the studies that is pointed out. The other aspect is, in India, we do have this problem of the last mile delivery, and we have had quite a few successes in that area, and especially where we've used technology, and some areas where we are yet to achieve success. I'll point out one success, and that is a project started in the mid-80s to late 80s, to provide telecommunication link to the remotest village in India. They started by the Center for Development of Telematics, and they achieved what they set out to achieve in a matter of about 4 years. And before the mobile technology revolution really took, shall we say, root in India, every single, not the smallest of villages, but every single town and the smallest human settlement wherever electricity could be connected, it had connection with the rest of India, with the rest of the world. So there used to be a signboard, saying STD, meaning subscriber trunk dialing to faraway places, then international subscriber dialing, and then fax. It used to be a sign, and that was a real great achievement, on the shoulders of which the next phase of mobile telephony came in. But that required a totally different technology. So therefore, its success is based on a different, shall I say, foundation. But the one thing is, in both cases, whether it is the mobile telephony or the Center for Development of Telematics, the government's partnership with the private sector has been a kind of an underlying phenomenon which has really helped the country connect and come closer together. Talking of mobile telephony and coming closer together, if I may just give two examples that we have vis-a-vis African countries. In 1964, India started what we call the India Technical and Economic Cooperation Program, by which we invited African students to come to India to study in different universities, in different places for training and other things. And then they went back. So at sometime in the mid-80s or early, I would say early 90s, we had practically in about 20 to 22 countries, at least one minister in the cabinet in every sub-Saharan African country who had been trained in India. And in one country we had more than 4 cabinet ministers who had been trained in India and 2 of them educated in India. So our link really goes back quite a few decades. And the second example that I give is basically a culmination of what we started then. The original program continues, by the way. The culmination of what we started then has resulted in the establishment of what we call the Pan-African E-network, by which we are today practically connected to all the countries in sub-Saharan Africa through satellite stations, one in Addis, near Addis, another in Dakar in West Africa, by which telemedicine, tele-education, transfer of technology and training for any number of people that they want. And it also includes a facility for the heads of state and heads of government of these African countries to have a video conference amongst themselves, all totally exclusive for them. This, I would think, is a kind of a culmination of an effort that started quite a few decades ago, and we have been able to achieve quite a lot. But whether we can, to go back to the original question, inequality in India is very real. Distribution of wealth still requires a lot of effort to make sure that the distribution is not skewed, but the government has to, shall I say, wait for the right moment. By some accounts, the right moment has arrived when, with the social media and the awareness of what is happening in one's country is now at a very high level. Let us hope that as the year progresses, certain things will change for the better, so that inequality does really come down in India.
Thank you. It shows that India has a long relation with Africa, and that may also influence the different perception of Indian activities in Africa related to Chinese activities, which are more recent in this extent. Russia, the perception, what is the equality issue, how much and what kind of inequality and equality in your country, and your perception of that?
The countries in BRICS group, all of them are countries not only relevant but also transitional. And the key question, what is transition? From which state to which next state, and what is our status, current status? I can say that 40 years ago, only 40 years ago, the Soviet Union was one of the more equal in social sense countries. And this system of total equality was based on the state property, almost total state property, almost absolute propaganda, very strong moral and social control, and of course a sense of many threats, and first threat was of course military threat. That was such experience. About 25 years ago, the country and our society and elites in the state system decided that this is not true way for development, and we destroyed this system of equality. What was the main reason and main motivation for this transition? People wanted to have freedom. And we received a lot of freedom. And Russian Federation became one of the more free countries in the world. If we compare the situation before this transition in the 90s and now in the terms of integral reporting initiative, we can qualify the Soviet Union equality system like a system with no financial targets. There was no finance in general. There was resources. There was redistribution between people, industries, and regions, and in favor of projects which considered like priorities and not enough attention to things which are not priority. And in the sense of social responsibility, it was a system with a huge social responsibility. And all party system and control of party dominance was in favor of this social responsibility. Everybody must be social responsible person. Another question, what was the social idea? That's the question. But I can say that socialist system was not only equal system, but also a system with a huge potential for creativity. And Soviet Union succeeded to demonstrate great rates of development, especially in the 50s and 60s, and partly in the 70s. And it was time for huge export of institutions into China, into India also, and into Africa, and even in some Latin American countries, not Brazil at that time. Actually, but now Russia is paying for this huge export because Russia is importing all institutions, all rules or principles from China, from India, from Brazil, from South Africa, and from the West, not only from the West, but also from all these countries. And actually, Russia is actually succeeding to import in institutions. In the sense of ecological responsibility, of course, Soviet Union, as in many other industrial countries, were totally irresponsible, because the main principle, fundamental, was man is the master, and nature must be a servant for all ideas or ventures of the man. And the story for this ideology is also very long, not just 20th century, but maybe 2 centuries ago. And we're exploiting the nature without any limitations. What happened in the 90s when the country decided to be not equal, decided to be very, very free? If we take 7 principles in the draft for this conference, all these 7 principles were violated. All these principles. Equality was not the priority number 1, maybe last priority, and other 7 principles. In the sense of integral reporting initiative, it was absolute priority for financials. Only 1 priority. No green priorities, no social responsible priorities. And we received what we received. And just finalizing, I'd like to mention that nevertheless, if we make diagnoses for Russia and other BRICS countries, we identify 2 just wisdom conclusions. One is, all these countries are in twins. We have many twins between past and future, between next generation and past generation, between different priorities, so many betweens. That I think first constatation of our situation. And also, we are not in the one group and together, we're also in between each other. I mean, China, India, and so on. And second principle was expressed by one Chinese political leader. Now he is considered like a person who made 70% of true decisions and true solutions, and 30% of mistakes. You know, I mentioned it. And he mentioned, nevertheless, in spite of any difficulties, in spite of any problems, in 10,000 years later, women will be mothers sometimes, and men will present all their beloved flowers. I think, in spite of all these problems, these Chinese politicians was correct.
Thank you very much. You mentioned a very important issue of equality and freedom, which is really a key issue in all the countries, I think, of the BRICS countries, as in all the other countries. You wanted to react quickly to...
Actually, Alex's insight really reminded me of a deeper thought, which is very much connected with the theme of this conference, is equality, the end virtue, or by Aristotle's the definition, can we live well based on equality? Because we used to have a very equalitarian society during the Stalin time, during the Mao Zedong time. Everyone was equal in China, in Russia, in Bulgaria, but we were equally poor, equally deprived. So therefore, I would say to live well should be the end destination. And also we need to also distinguish, what is the difference between equalness and fairness. So I believe that the equality is really earned. It's not given as a benevolence. And people do not have to feel complacent about, being equal to everyone if you don't do the right work or if you don't simply do the work. Okay, so that's my point.
Thank you very much. Aurélien, Atidegla from Benin, you are very close to the grassroots, as we call it. Listening to this big politics and seeing your people, so to say, what are the key challenges for equality in your view? And then after that, we will come to another round on ethical issues related to that.
From the point of view of civil society actor coming from Francophone Africa, I'm partially agree with the point of view of the and the three critical challenges in the area of inequality I identify are first the issue of tax fairness, very critical because in our country, our government negotiate the contract with lack of transparency. So transnational corporations have good experience in negotiation of this kind of contract, but in our side there is not enough expertise to negotiate fairly this kind of contract. Secondly, due to this imbalance in negotiation, our government don't have enough resources to meet social service demand coming from the people, so that there is a limited access to social service, water, health, energy, social protection. So that, for me, the big problem is a question of approach. We need to emphasize on right-based approach to help our government to be very strong, to build capable state, because in our country they have a lot of resources. They have the possibility to mobilize enough resources to reach development goal, but due to the lack of governance, lack of transparency with emerging developing countries, BRICS countries. They are not able to face the increasing demand of social service. Last point is the question of capacity building. You know, in the context of Busan partnership, there is a good interest in what they call triangular cooperation. This kind of cooperation can help our country to be more to benefit from expertise coming from developing countries and rich countries, because in the area of agriculture, for example, we have some experience on rice rice program, and with Russia and Brazil, they launched a big program, and this program is funded by European countries, and expertise coming from Brazil and rich countries. So they put a good attention to capacity building to enable our country to become to have the required expertise on this kind of partnership.
Thank you very much. I think you mentioned an important aspect of equality which was not yet mentioned today, equality in negotiation power and capacity. So how does that play a role in equality of trade exchange, of trade relations, but also in education, in so many other aspects? I'd like to have a second round here before then opening to the plenary on what are the values now behind, because you mentioned that, and you also, equality versus freedom. We will have several workshops today and tomorrow specializing also on that, on values of equality. What does it exactly mean on spirituality and economy and values and others? But among us, what do you see as the need of clarity of what are the lead values? Is equality a lead value for the future? Or is it fairness? Or is it freedom? Or is it harmony? And how do they relate to each other? And related to that question is another question which comes up again and again also. Is the 20th century as the century of, so to say, Christian European values now shifting to Asian values, and what would that be? Is it the Confucian world? There are more than 1,000 Confucian institutes now, I think, around the world, which is not about Confucianism, but about China's culture. But still, is that what kind of values or worldviews which promote equality and which worldviews hinder equality in your respective context? Maybe India wants to start. Ravi. Briefly, so that we can open up with.
More than equality, freedom, and fairness, maybe a jumble of the three, resulting in availability of opportunity on a level playing field to a citizen who wants a service, or a citizen who wants education, or a citizen who wants to be an entrepreneur. It's the equality of opportunity that really should emanate from all this. And in the Indian context, there are big corporates who have done, are continuing to do a lot of important work in this areas. For example, the Tatas have, ages back, their promotion for pure physics and pure chemistry, and Tata Institute of Fundamental Research was one of the first institutes to be started. And then the other big corporate house, Birlas, they started many higher learning institutions like engineering colleges and all, right, way back in the 60s. But after, in the recent years, the information technology companies have really come forward, and their focus is on two aspects. One is on education, and the second is on training. Training not only for their own use, but also for the industrial sector in general. So I get a feeling that the opportunity, equality of opportunity of education was provided by the corporates in the 60s and the 70s, and the equality of opportunity, both from the point of view of education and training, is being provided. I'd like to just name one. One of the companies, Messrs. Wipro, they have taken a program of training school teachers across villages in India to lay a foundation for a solid education system, since right to education has now become a fundamental right for all Indian citizens.
Thank you. In Russia, equality should be the leading
I think there is no simple answer, because even individual from different ages has different priorities. Sometimes more important freedom, sometimes more important responsibility, and so on. I think there is a matrix of values and different variables, and they are relative. For example, maybe now more important future than past. Maybe now more important responsibility than irresponsibility. Maybe now is more important creativity than consumer, for example. And besides, there is also absolute values, but they are mostly religious.
Thank you. Leo?
Alex has been too much been contaminated by the Karl Marx dialectics, but you're right. My view is more universal, ways that equality is the value, but it can only serve as a starting point. So everyone should be given the equal access to opportunities and resources. But fairness serves the process. So in the distribution of those resources, in the game setting, there should be a fairness that is the dominating principle. But the end point should be efficiency and happiness, because you cannot guarantee in the end everyone will get equal. You can have a starting line to run a marathon, but you need to have the gold medalers, you need to have the bronze medalers, etc. So otherwise, the whole dynamism of the human society will be losing steam. So in this way, if we really look at the cosmo type of the human value, it is really, in the end, the theory of equilibrium that will work, which means the different groups join together in a bargaining pool, and when everyone is satisfied with their part of their food, then that is where equalness comes to be a dictating definition.
Maybe first, Aurélien, what is then your view of this priority of equality? You mentioned equality of negotiation power as an example.
So, for me, the first principle will be the transparency. The transparency, the sharing of information, good information, to allow the different parties to be very ready to negotiate and to defend his interests. Secondly, it's important to take into account the responsibility of each stakeholder. Responsibility for the states to on implementation of rights-based approach, but also responsibility for cooperation to respect rights, human rights, the right of workers, etc., etc. And lastly, in our context, we need a great demand of accountability. The authority in charge of the implementation of politics must be very accountable to the community, and we must build capacity for NGOs and the local community to be very proactive and to ask for more accountability to the authority.
Thank you very much, Deon.
The reason why inequality is a moral issue is because it excludes people. And it excludes people from political participation, from economic participation, and from social participation. And I don't think it's as simple that we can either, if we look at the lowest, the most unequal in society, that we can legislate them out of that. Neither should we work with the assumption that they should simply work themselves out of that. Neither should we opt for sort of social Darwinism of survival of the fittest. I think there is a moral responsibility of the privileged and the powerful and those with the resources to assist the most unequal to get to a position where they can start working themselves out of that position. And for that, I think there are three basic virtues. The first one is sympathy. If we don't have sympathy for others, it will never happen. Klaus, that's what you said. You must see it in the eye, on the face of another, in order to start that process. Secondly, there must be dialogue. We should not define what is in the best interest of the unequal. They should have a voice in that. And thirdly, it's about practical and active engagement. In other words, following an agenda to progressively get them out of that position of inequality.
Thank you very much. We open to the floor. We have another 10 minutes. Just Aurélien first. Yes, one, and then second. The micro. Here. This one.
Thank you, Christoph. I just want to make a very quick and brief comment and then a question to our friend Deon.
Brief.
Yes.
So that others can.
I think when discussing such a thing, such a theme, equality, we need to rediscover the very DNA of this issue. 2 entry points. One, equality as a process, which needs to be tackled from the informative, formative, and transformative dimensions. We are all, there is a danger of talking about equality just as on the educative, informative level, and forgetting about the formative and the transformative processes or levels. Second, we need to have the courage to reach a point of ideological deconstruction, spiritual deconstruction, cognitive deconstruction as far as equality is concerned. There are some people or cultures who think that our economy, like the BRICS, our economy is superior to those who are developing, or the G8 or the G20. So we need to reach a moment of ethical, spiritual, anthropological deconstruction. Last, we need to engage and rediscover the value of moderation. I think the problem here is actually moderation. In thinking, moderation. In capacity building, moderation. In resource management, moderation in all these issues. Last question to our friend. Do you think, you have just commented on a very issue, do you think that sympathy as a value, as some ethical value or principle is the only thing? Because we need to move beyond sympathy and move to empathy. Okay? Do you think the Chinese in Africa, they have sympathy or empathy about Africans? I can tell a lot of stories here, bad stories, very bad stories. They don't have this sympathy. I come from Tanzania. They are now exploring gas and oil, and the life of Tanzanians is worsening. So there is a danger of showing empirical facts and figures, functionalism, mathematical figures and factors, and forgetting the qualitative approach to these ramifications. So I agree, I do agree with the numbers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Can I react to that, please?
Yeah. We have emergence of plutocrats and chronic capitalists, which are no more than 500 to 600. Yeah. We have emergence of plutocrats and chronic capitalists who are no more than 400 to 500, who dictate what should be consumed by you and what should be your life. And that has never been addressed here. We always think as if it is a poor man's, we have to really inequality. In fact, inequality is caused by these people. Number two, and most important, Uruguay has been rated as the country by economists. They say that the cover page economy is Uruguay. And people love to satisfy their needs and to be ethical and equal, rather than to be prosperous, exploited, and morally bankrupt in the name of fairness. I think I would really like to have a, the question is, would you like to have moral bankruptcy and prosperity rather than equality and ethical? Thank you.
Thank you. Strong words.
Over there. I know you haven't meant it, but the point I want to make, there is not such a thing like we Chinese. There is not such a thing like we Germans. We always have the same moral Gauss distribution. There are some real heroes, and then there are some real assholes. This is the way the Lord has created man, first. Second, I fundamentally believe that most of the people in the world have good intentions. It has to do with the self-esteem. I do not violate human rights because it's my dignity that prevents that. So let me come back to where are the issues then? If, and I don't know whether that's the case, if the Chinese in Tanzania are doing things that we all would criticize as inappropriate, what were the contracts? Who signed them? What is in there? Talk to Peter Eigen of the Raw Material Transparency Initiative. The good practices are known, the best practices are there. It's up to use them, and if you have it in the contract, and if they are violating the contract, take them to court. It does simply not make sense to moralize about that. It does not make sense, and it leads to wrong conclusions.
Thank you. We have to be a female. It's a last condition, yes. Because it is a very male discussion, it does not reflect the reality of global business, because we have in the team a majority of women, and in the network, 45% of all the 100,000 people are women.
We are hired,
but
we
here
do
we are.
deliver work.
Okay.
I just want to say something which it is a reality in Africa, because the contract is done by the government, and the community are in the village, maybe 200 or many kilometers. But we need here to to do something well for the humanity. So it is easy to know the reality and to help. We need that Chinese help us to try to build a good relationship. And I think that the government, they know now, because we are speaking here, if in the report, the final report, we will say to the Chinese to know that the government in Africa, we have a problem and we have to solve it. If they can take into account the community, if they say to you, go in this place, please take also, communicate also with this community and try to see what to do to the government, because I belong to the south and they tell the thing is going to the north. So I just do what I need, because people there, I don't think globally this is human being or this is also African. I just sign because maybe the advantage I have, and I just sell this part of the country. And it's really a big problem. But we have a tool now. The African try to do also something, because we know that our law is colonial law. And then we try now with the new African Law Library and government to try to consolidate the customer law and also the modern law, and educate also, to try to educate also the community. So it's a real problem. So the government signed, they didn't take care of what is doing on the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anapa. It's an important issue that we have not yet discussed broadly, the legal aspect, access to law as an aspect of equality. I would like to give the final word before I make a summary to Deon, because there was a question to him, and also what was said here, this question of, what are the solutions in the perception and in the relationship with China-Africa as an example, but we could also say BRICS in Africa.
It's very important, I think, to realize that there's not a guilty party, or one guilty party, but that all of us need to play our part. On the part of Africans, they need to get rid of their dependency syndrome. They need to become clear about their national priorities. They should set conditions for engagement, and they should do something about corruption. That is not someone else's problem. That's the African problem that needs to be solved by Africans. Similarly, on the Chinese part, I think important that very often the practices that we don't like in Africa is an export of Chinese practices. So I think it starts with internal reform of social and economic and environmental responsibility in China. It's also about setting policy for Chinese outbound investors. And I think then a very important role player is civil society and the media, that they should also play their part. And finally, dialogue is so important. We should talk with one another and not demonize one another when it comes to these issues.
Well,
Thank you. One response.
Yeah, one response is that the analogy between the relationship between China and Africa is very much like a blind elephant in a house without house room. So, I leave the rest for imagination.
Okay, we have to close because we have another announcement before the lunch. But I'd like to summarize in the following way. I think on the analytical part at the beginning, we have seen that inequalities and equalities have very different facets in the different societies. Some common, but some access to natural resources like water and food and land is a priority. In others, the access to rights and to recognition and to negotiation power is more important. But that led to the second part of the values. And I think what was visible is that Europe started to refer or to connect equality with other values, not in terms of a priority equality, even if it's the theme today is the only and absolute value. It has to be connected to responsibility, to transparency, to accountability, to fairness, to inclusiveness. And then it gets a picture of the value of equality in a society. And I think that is something that can be deepened in the next 2 days. It's just the start of the discussion. The third point was then not only on the level of values but virtues. You mentioned 3 virtues and other have been added: sympathy, dialogue, active, moderation as a virtue. And that leads also to the deeper question that you raised on what are the spiritual roots, so to say, for these values and virtues, and how can we develop that? And we have a workshop on that also during these days. So it's a start, an appetizer of the discussion, another appetizer, and we will continue the debate during these days. Thank you very much for your valuable